Alright, gentlemen, welcome to yet another exciting episode of Thank Fucking God. This heat wave is over, and it's gonna be back. It always comes back. But today we're gonna talk about, because it's a geopolitically slow news week, not much happening. I'm gonna be eating those words, I guess, by week's end. But let's talk a little bit about what I'm trying to accomplish on this channel, right? What is my general philosophy? Because I do a lot of videos about Europe should do this, Europe should do that. I say Europe should seize the island of Socotra. Europe should negotiate alliances with the Mediterranean states, with the southern Mediterranean states like Tunisia, the northern coast of Africa. But those are all like specific applications of a general thrust, like a general picture. And in this video I'm going to share my general picture with you, and my general picture is Europe should push outwards. What does that mean? I see a lot of in the, like, let's not call it a community, we're still not a community, right? But there is a group of people on Twitter, on YouTube, on Blue Sky, on whatever the fuck, who are saying Europe should rearm, Europe should chart its own civilizational geopolitical destiny. I agree with that. You may have noticed, in this video, in many other videos, I say that. But a lot of them have this mentality of Fortress Europe, right? Where basically we hunker down behind our ramparts here on our continent, and so what do? We defend ourselves. Okay, we should defend ourselves, but that's not the right way to defend yourself. That's not the European way of defending yourself. When Europeans are attacked, we fight back. We counter-attack. We come over to your house and fuck your shit up. That's how it goes, and that's how the world knows not to fuck with us, because having a reputation as a dangerous opponent is actually quite a potent weapon in of itself. It's called deterrence. You don't get deterrence unless you fuck someone up every now and then. Well, anyways, so I've always thought about, why should we hunker down and maybe have a fight on our own territory when we could be intercepting our enemies before they attack us, and push out. This is why I've said, okay, first step, we have to secure our borders, and we have to create buffer zones which would make it difficult to reach Europe and bring the fight to us. Step one would be to arm Ukraine to the teeth and support it unconditionally until such time that the Russian state has disintegrated. And I think there is a real chance we see the Russian Federation disintegrate, and not the way the Soviet Union did, so where they sort of were beaten back but still managed to retain state cohesion and survive as the Russian Federation. No, I mean actually shatter it to the point where it's no longer a coherent state, and then European armies move in, and then we reorder those post-Russian societies. We start thinking about the post-Russian space and how to control it, and how to really adapt it to the needs of Europe, right? This would necessarily entail also liberating Russians from their, essentially from the continuing and enduring Mongol or pseudo-Mongol yoke, and resurrecting their ancient identities, as Novgorodians, as Suzdalians, right? All of these states which were swallowed up by Muscovy, destroyed, and just subordinated to this evil empire all those centuries ago. Now, this is going to be very difficult, but I think we should give it the old college try. It's the barest minimum for the survival of this continent, because the problem is that with Russia, the enemies of Europe have this promontory directly into the heart of the continent. So we need to push this promontory out towards the Ural Mountains and the Volga River. That's the barest minimum of the European sphere of influence. And furthermore, I believe that we should become allies with the states beyond the Volga River, specifically newly independent Tatarstan and Bashkiria and Kazakhstan, and not allow them to fall into the Chinese sphere of influence. They should be friends of Europe, and they should be our little buffer zone against dangers coming in from the steppe. And there are always going to be dangers coming in from the steppe. That's like the Eastern Front. On the Southern Front, I've mentioned North Africa, the Levant, all of these places. Right now there's a lot of states which are maybe not hostile to Europe, but they seem to have forgotten that fucking with us has consequences. So they should be periodically reminded of that, as politely but firmly reminded that they're not allowed to be enemies of Europe. You either get to be a friend of Europe or you get to be a corpse. But yeah, specifically to these things. But in a sense, right, we're going to have a lot of problems there. We're going to have problems because right now we're not only facing the enemies of Europe and just in terms of just Russia, China, or some of these extremist ideologies coming in from the Middle East, but we're also seeing the United States having become an enemy of Europe after they elected to essentially secede from our civilization and embrace a third world ideology known as MAGA. And I've discussed this in other videos, but I do believe that we have lived through a just like unbelievable tectonic seismic shift in civilization. This is the takeover of America by this anti-civilizational force known as MAGA is, I would say, comparable to the split between Western and Eastern Rome, leaving us here in Europe as Eastern Rome, as Byzantium, as the sort of remnant of a once great, now sundered civilization. But here's the thing. People say, oh, Byzantium remnant. Byzantium hung on for 1,000 years. It was the most powerful state in Europe for 700 of those. And delicious water. And a lot of and it had just such a massive cultural and technological and economic and military, like every sphere of human achievement was Byzantium #1 for about 700 to 800 years of its existence as a remnant of the Roman Empire. And I see no reason why Europe shouldn't replicate Byzantium. I'm actually gunning for the medal, right? We are going to beat Byzantium's record for, post-tectonic civilizational cataclysm survival and thriving. And it wasn't just survival. Really, this was the superpower of the early medieval and medieval period. Like, it's only really in the high medieval period that Byzantium started losing steam. But now we have a problem because America is slowly becoming an enemy of Europe, and this is emboldening other enemies of Europe. So Europe really needs to start thinking outwardly, and this should be reflected in our procurement and it's like weapons building policy. A lot of people are saying, okay, we need to rearm, we need to build our armies. I agree with that. But I would say the threat on land is better served by arming and supporting and financing Ukraine, who are going to grind away our primary competitor on land. That would be Russia. After that is done, yes, we need to go in. We need to develop the infrastructure to integrate the vast Russian space or post-Russian space into our civilizational paradigm. That includes the trade network, and we're going to have to find a way to get our hands on all these resources, including the human ones, and we're going to have to find a way to sort of re-civilize the Russians who are left. That's going to be very difficult, but I think it can be done, and we should definitely try it. I have some ideas on how it could be done. I need to sit down with some of my friends who actually speak Russian so we can develop it. I can only barely understand it a little bit, so there's that. But fundamentally, this would also mean that Europe needs to build up its capabilities, crucially at sea, in the air, and in space, where we are woefully behind the Americans. We are behind the Chinese, not woefully so, and this is something that should definitely not be ignored, because if we're going to project power, if we're going to push outwards and fight the enemies of Europe in their homelands instead of ours, right, we're going to have to find a way to make use of the sea, of space, and the aerial theater, and find ways to essentially inflict catastrophic damage on anyone who would dare threaten the European homeland. And fundamentally, I think we can actually do that. I think because the Americans have done it, and they have less population, their economy is less stable, and so they don't really have the civilizational tradition of empire that we do. Now, we don't necessarily have to become empire. We can just I mean, we don't really have to start colonies, right? But I think we can do it. I think Europe can once again straddle the world and finally, finally take its rightful place, you know? And yeah, then we're going to grow old, we're going to die like every other civilization. But civilizations are living matter. Sometimes they die, but of their molecules, something new and interesting arises. So I think that that's all I have for today. It's not as focused as other videos, but this is the general, I wouldn't even call it theoretical, the emotional push of what we should do. Yeah, so let's not dox the lady. Bye-bye, people, and take care.